joined us.
Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And welcome to Thursday morning Bible study. Hope you all had a good week and look forward to continuing our Bible study. So let's see where we were last week, and we'll take it from there. Okay, now you may remember we started last week on chapter 13 of Mark's Gospel. And I had told you that this passage, this chapter, which we'll probably finish today, is probably one of the most difficult chapters in Mark's Gospel because there's lots of different references to different occasions and to different events, and it's not always clear what the reference is. So remember, we said there's probably 3 events that are being referenced in this section. The first event is the passion and death of Jesus, which would have happened in the year 33, and certainly would have already been long happened when this gospel was written. So you've got that event as one event. Then the next event would have been the destruction of the temple. And remember, we talked about that in the year 70. So 37 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus, there was an uprising in Israel, and the Romans came in and destroyed Israel really once and for all, and destroyed the temple. And that temple has never been rebuilt since then. And today in modern Israel, the only thing we have left of the temple is the Western Wall. And on the top of the temple area, the Temple Mount, is the mosque to the Dome of the Rock, which we didn't mention this last week. It commemorates, there are 3 great events in the life of Muhammad, and the event that this mosque commemorates is Muhammad ascended into heaven for a period of time, and then he came back down to earth to deliver more of his prophecies. And so that happened at the Dome of the Rock, which is what the mosque is today. So the second event that that is being referenced to is the destruction of the temple. And depending on when the Gospel of Mark was actually written, we don't know for sure. We think at the earliest it was written in the 60s, which would have meant that it was written before the destruction of the temple. And so references to the destruction of the temple, if that were the case, would be prophecies, because it had not yet happened. Or if the Gospel of Mark was written in the 70s, then the destruction of the temple would have already occurred. And that would have been in the year 70. And so references to the temple, they would have known that it already happened. Okay. And then the third event that this section references is the end of time, the last day, the return of Jesus. All of those things that happen at the end of the world are also being referenced in this story. So for all of that, of course, that would be part of prophecy, part of things that had not yet happened, but are expected to happen. Okay, so there are 3 events: the death and resurrection of Jesus, which would have occurred year 33 or so, the destruction of the temple, which would have occurred around the year 70, and the end of time, which is yet to occur. Any question about those 3 events before we continue to read chapter 13?
Just tell your birds to be quiet.
Yeah, they're always noisy. All right. Well, then let's start. We're going to pick up on verse 14 is where we left off. So who would like to read starting verse 14? Don't all jump over each other.
I'll read, Father.
Okay.
Today. When you see the desolating abomination standing where he should not, let the reader understand, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. And a person on a housetop must not go down or enter to get anything out of his house. And a person in a field must not return to get his cloak. Woe to pregnant women and nursing mothers in those days. Pray that this does not happen in winter. For those times will have tribulation such as not been since the beginning of God's creation until now, nor ever will be. If the Lord had not shortened those days, no one would be saved. But for the sake of the elect whom he chose, he did shorten the days. If anyone says to you then, look, here is the Messiah. Look, there he is. Do not believe it. False messiahs and false prophets will arise and will perform signs and wonders in order to mislead, if that were possible, the elect. Be watchful. I have told it all to you beforehand.
Okay. All right, as always, we start with what's your first impression of that passage?
Confusing. Let's start back at the beginning.
All right, confusing. What's confusing to you?
So Jesus is saying this, right? This is Jesus talking.
Yes, this is quote from Jesus.
Yeah, okay, so we need to understand who's talking and who's he talking to. His disciples or a group? Where is it?
I think
Disciples, right?
yes, he's talking to his disciples.
Okay.
Remember, as he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple area, Peter, James, and John and Andrew asked him privately.
Right.
And so then he starts this.
Okay,
this whole
now
section.
we're back. Now we're back, remembering who's he talking to, and then we hear from Mark. He's saying, "Let the reader understand." Okay, so he's writing this, and he wants us, we're the readers, right?
Yep, I imagine so.
To understand what he's saying. So when you see the desolation, abomination standing where it should not, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. So I'm confused about that question.
Okay.
That paragraph.
All right. Yeah, before we delve into all that, yeah, just to say what generally are you said the passage as a whole was confusing. So, okay,
Right.
So that's part of the confusing. What does this desolating abomination mean, right?
Right.
Okay. Other things that confused you?
I'm thinking that we prior to this, that is he talking about the temple being destroyed, and then he's talking about the person on the. So I'm going to the person on. So anything that you had in that building, don't go back and seep through it. Is what I'm hearing. That's what I'm thinking when I hear that the person on the housetop must go down and enter and get anything out of his house. Is it God's house, or he's talking about the person's house? Right now I'm just in a confused state.
Okay.
You know what?
That's fair.
I was thinking that even though he's talking to his disciples, that he's given a general warning to everyone who is affected, or like the Israelites or the Gentiles who have converted or whomever, because my first thought is that, okay, this is going to be terrifying, because he's talking about what's going to happen, I guess, before the end of days, and that everyone is going to be suffering in some kind of way. So when I looked at that passage about a person on a housetop must not go down or enter or get anything, in other words, don't go grabbing for material stuff. Don't go looking to try to figure out how you're going to save this, that, or the other, because none of it's going to matter. Everybody's going to suffer. So that was my first reaction, is that it says the Great Tribulation, but that people are going to be miserable. Woe to, I figure where it is, woe to pregnant women. All of that just tells me that it's going to be horrific.
Okay, and for you, you're interpreting that as a reference to the end of time. Is that what I'm understanding you saying?
Yes, what's going to happen before the end of time.
Right. Whereas D was speculating, could some of these other references be to the destruction of the temple? Right. So that's could be a potential why some of it's confusing. It's not clear exactly what event is he talking about. Okay, other thoughts?
So why is he pointing to when you see the desolation, when you see the desolating abomination standing, why is that confusing me?
Well, there's a reason. It's a reference to something. We'll get to it when we go back and look line by line. Right now, again, I still, as we first do, we always want to get your first impressions. So what I'm hearing is, your first impression is that it's confusing. It's not clear what Jesus is referring to. Is he referring to the destruction of the temple? Is he referring to the end of time? But whatever he's referring to, what Esther is getting from it, it's a pretty scary time. And you better not be rushing to take care of your material things. You better be getting your own personal sort of spiritual house in order.
Right. I agree with that.
Okay. Before we start breaking it down, any other impressions?
I mean, it sounds like a real apocalypse to me, like everything is coming to an end. And like Esther said, you better be ready because you don't know when he's coming, how he's coming. And you just should be ready for him. But I also read into this that the people that will be saved, the people that will not undergo so much suffering will be those that are elected by God.
Okay. Yeah. And we'll come back to that word apocalyptic. That's a great word, Garnetta. So we'll come back to that. All right. Any other comments? Okay. Well, let's start first with that word apocalyptic. When you hear the word apocalyptic, what comes to mind?
The end.
The end. Okay. And is there a reason why that comes to mind?
Because of the book of Revelation.
Because of the book of Revelation, yes. Right? What's another name for the book of Revelation?
Apocalypse?
The apocalypse, yes. So apocalypse actually is simply the Greek word that means revelation. Okay. So most modern Christians, when they hear the word apocalypse, will think of the end time. And that's a valid thought because of the book of Revelation. But in a more generic sense, apocalypse simply means revelation. So apocalyptic writing is writing that is trying to express a revelation by God. Okay. And it's not necessarily a reference to the end time. So there's apocalyptic writing, for example, in the Old Testament, in the book of Daniel, that is not necessarily a reference to the end time. But apocalyptic writing tends to be writing that is very symbolic, right? So it uses imagery that isn't necessarily intended to reference a historical thing as much as it is to reference a symbol. So like in the book of Revelation, you know how you have all these crazy animals and they've got 10 heads or, 10 eyes or those kinds of things. Remember when we studied the book of Revelation, if you were with us when we did that, how those references were really symbols of other things. And so it wasn't really that there was going to be, a beast that had 7 heads and 10 eyes and that kind of stuff. But that those 7 and 10 were references to other events in history. So apocalyptic writing really is writing that reveals that there's going to be conflict, okay? And good is going to conflict with evil. There's going to be tribulation, and there's going to be some kind of resolution of it at the end. So that's what apocalyptic writing is all about. And so this is absolutely apocalyptic writing, this whole section. And so we know Jesus preached in the apocalyptic style. Who else in the New Testament, did anybody remember who else we said it preached in the apocalyptic style?
Wasn't it Paul?
Not Paul.
Was I don't know.
John the Baptist.
Yeah, I was thinking that couldn't come out my
Okay, if you remember, if you go back to the beginning of these gospels and you read the preaching of John the Baptist, again, he's talking about conflict and the end and the revolution and the resolution of that stuff. And this is one of the reasons why they think that Jesus could have originally been a disciple of John, because his preaching here sounds very much like John's preaching. And maybe he learned how to preach like that from John the Baptist himself. So this is clearly apocalyptic preaching that Jesus is offering right now. It's vivid, it's symbolic, it's got conflict, it's good and evil, and then there's going to be a resolution at the end. You with me?
Yes.
So generally, apocalyptic writing does refer to the end of time, but it doesn't always refer to the end of time. So let's go take this step by step and see what some of the references might be. So the hardest thing, the very first thing, when you see the desolating abomination standing where he should not, basically where he should not be standing. Anybody have a clue what that's a reference to? Don't worry if you don't. You shouldn't really know it.
I know I shouldn't say this, but it's, for me, when I looked at that, it's like something or someone is in a place or position where by all rights and reasons they should not be. And the first person that came to mind was Donald Trump. How could he ascend to the office of President of the United States? Because in my mind, he was an abomination.
Right, I agree. And some people worship him like an idol.
Exactly.
All right, actually, you're actually playing right into the correct images. But of course, this is not a reference to Donald Trump. But you're absolutely right. Somebody is where they shouldn't be, and people are worshiping it as an idol, right? This is a reference to it's really a historical time. Some of you might remember because I've talked about it before. It's about a reference about 200 to 300 years before the birth of Christ. The Greeks, remember the Greeks and Alexander the Great? They were the ones who conquered Israel back then. So do you remember that? This is before the Romans came in. Anybody remember that Greece had conquered Israel?
I remember.
Okay. And when the Greeks came in, they started imposing all of their practices on the Jews, which the Jews felt were very offensive. And one of them, remember the gymnasiums? Anybody remember what the Greek gymnasiums were all about?
No, I don't remember that. I know
Okay.
they came over, but I can't remember that.
So one of the things that the Greeks did is they would build gymnasiums. Yeah, and a gymnasium then was similar to what a gymnasium is today. It was a place where athletes competed. Okay. And how did the athletes dress in the Greek world when they competed?
They were naked, weren't they?
They were naked, yes. And if there were Greeks who came into the gymnasium and they were naked, and they're all men, first of all, and they were invited the Jewish boys to come in and compete with them in the gymnasium, what would have been obvious to the people in the gymnasium?
They wouldn't have done that. It would be an abomination, I guess. They wouldn't have done that.
No, they're in there, but they're looking at each other. You got naked Greeks and you got naked Jews. What are they going to see?
Circumcision.
Circumcision, right? So the naked Greeks are not going to be circumcised, and the naked Jews are going to be circumcised. And the young naked Jewish men then are they're made to feel bad that they're circumcised. And so what do? They try to cover over their circumcision. Right. And that was, and then to do that was, a rejection of their faith, right? Of the covenant with Moses. So if you go back and you read the book of Maccabees, you'll see references to all of that the young Jewish boys are competing in the gymnasium. They're trying to cover over their circumcision, which is an affront to their religion. So there's a lot of conflict between, sort of the older Jews and the Greeks for what's happening with the younger ones. Now, in the midst of all of that, one of the Greek emperors goes and places a statue of himself in the temple.
Oh, whoa.
Okay, and this is Antiochus. I think it's Antiochus the fourth. Okay, so he places a statue of himself in the temple. So what do you think? How do you think that went over?
Like I said, whoa. Yeah, they weren't happy about that.
And why? Why was the statue put there, do you think? This goes back to what you said, Garnetta. What is the statue?
Seems like an idol.
It's an idol, exactly. So Antiochus puts an image of himself in the temple for the purposes of the Jews to worship him. And this does not go over well with the Jews. And a group of rebels, the Maccabees, flee Jerusalem and hide in the mountains, and they get ready to overthrow the Greek rule. Okay.
Now hold it, back up here. So now I'm seeing what you said. And I would not have picked that up. I would not have referred to go back to Maccabees and think about the statue. But now it says, when you see the desolation abomination standing where he should not, and then they run to the mountains, and now I see the thing, but I see the connection. And so he's talking to an audience who understand that connection.
Yes, they probably would have picked up that reference a lot more easily than we would. So yes, so if you see that the desolating abomination is the image of Antiochus, and it's standing where he should not be standing, which is in the temple, right? And it causes the Jews to flee to the mountains, right? And
Right,
they're fleeing to the mountains so that they can regroup and get ready to overthrow the Greeks. Now, as a historical matter, do the Maccabees win? Do the Maccabees overthrow the Greeks?
No,
No, they do.
they do.
Yes, they win, and they reclaim the temple, and they reconsecrate the temple for 8 days. And there's a celebration that Jews have that commemorates the reconsecration of the temple after throwing out the Greeks. Anybody know what that celebration is?
What is that Hanukkah where the oil burned for 8 days?
Yep, that's Hanukkah. Okay. So the celebration of Hanukkah is really not the Jewish Christmas, okay, which is how we look at it in the United States. Hanukkah is the feast that commemorates the reconsecration of the temple after the Jews, after the Maccabees, threw the Greeks out. Okay, so
My question becomes, so why does isn't this a book about the Maccabees that is not included in the Protestant Bible?
right, it's not included in the Jewish or the Protestant Bible.
So how would, so if
They
this passage,
they know about the book. I mean, Jews know about the book of Maccabees, and certainly Jewish scholars study it.
but I'm thinking a Protestant, if they're reading this passage, how do they make the connection?
Well, yeah, it's easier because we have it in our Bible, and if we read our Bible, we'll see it in our Bible. But I mean, as a historical matter, people know, what happened in the 3rd century before Christ. And again, so like the book of Maccabees, the reason it's in our Bible is that we think it was inspired by God, and that there is a spiritual revelation that the book has for us. The Protestants and the Jews, they understand that the writing is a significant historical and Jewish historical and spiritual writing. They just don't think it's revealed by God, okay, or inspired by God. So that's why it's not in their Bible, but they know about it.
Mhm. Okay, so one more question, and I'm sorry. The thing is, I started saying at the beginning, you said, what's my overview of this? And I said, it's confusing. And to me, I don't remember, do we put this passage in Sunday reading, being that we have to, the Bible is set up for our church and ABC sessions. Is this one of the readings that we would have to read? And how would this be difficult for you as a pastor to make us understand what they're talking about?
Yes, so usually you just skip over it. I do believe, I mean, I before we leave, I could go look on the lectionary, but these passages occur in the last few weeks of the liturgical year. So we will be reading it in a few weeks, because we're coming towards the end of the liturgical year. So it's probably like the 32nd, 33rd, or probably the 32nd, 33rd week of ordinary time. We're right now, I think this weekend will be the 25th Sunday. So in 8 weeks, we'll probably be reading this passage.
So it'd be prior to this, and Jesus talking about the end times prior to this passage we talked last week, that was going to be like, we will go through series of things before the end, the series of things. And I was listening to what Esther was talking about earlier, but what I see, it is bringing this whole thing current. With pregnant women suffering and nursing mothers in these days, I'm seeing the suffering that people are doing in Mississippi and Louisiana. And then it says a passage here, about pray that this does not happen in winter. Can you imagine? And then I'm thinking, oh, wow, right now they don't have any electricity, but it's hot, but it's not bad as being frozen and cold. So that's what I'm thinking. I'm saying, okay, this must be one of those things that we talked about last week, that many things will happen before the end times. Okay, I'm not asking more questions.
You're not asking any more questions? Is that what you just said?
Yes, I'm not going to ask any more questions.
Well, no, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, well, let's see. Let's break it down then a little bit more. So if this is a reference to the desecration of the temple, right? Of the three events we talked about, Jesus's death and resurrection, the destruction of the temple in the year 70, or the end time, what do you think this passage might be kind of prompting the Jews to be thinking about? So actually, Dee, you had said it earlier when you said when you first read this, it made you think of the destruction of the temple.
Yes,
and that's extreme, really valid, because by referring to an event that happened in the temple in the past, Jesus is prompting them perhaps to be prepared for another event, another desolation, abomination of the temple in the future, which would be a reference to the destruction of the temple in the year 70. And when the Romans came in and destroyed the temple, what do you think the Jews did?
Ran, I guess.
Yeah, they fled, right?
Yeah,
I mean, because remember, the Romans aren't just destroying the temple; they're conquering and destroying Jerusalem once and for all. And so remember how we said that they come in and they destroy everything, everybody flees. And then after that, that's where you finally get two different religions emerging from that later on, right? Judaism and Christianity. So this could very well be a reference to the coming destruction of the temple. So in other words, when the Romans come to destroy the temple, those in Judea will flee to the mountains, and the person on a housetop must not go down and enter to get anything out of the house, or a person in the field must not return to get his cloak. Woe to the pregnant women. Just get the hell out, right? Because their country, their city, their temple is all being destroyed. And just pray that it doesn't happen in winter, because that would be even a harder time to endure all of this, because there's no food, it's cold, all of those things. All right. So that's one reference. Now Garnetta felt and Esther felt that it's more a reference to the end of time. Could that be? Garnetta and Esther, you want to defend your position?
Well, I see both sides. I see both perspectives. But I still, it could apply to both.
Okay, that's exactly right. So we applied it to the destruction of the temple. But how do you see the end of the world in this? The end of time?
Well, I originally thought that these would be ongoing things. It's not going to be something that happens quickly and then all of a sudden it's over. So I can see this great tribulation building up until Christ comes back.
And I can also see natural disasters in this.
Okay.
Famine, fire. I see it all in this.
Right, and it's happening now, even.
Okay.
Yeah. But the end of the world is coming with talking about that Esther and Garnetta was talking about, I see it in 19 and 20, verses 19 and 20. For it says, for those times will have tribulation such as not had been since the beginning of God's creation until now, nor ever will be. And then in 20 says, if the Lord had not shortened these days, no one would be saved for the sake of the elect whom he chose. So I'm thinking right here, it's going to be, it's going to be massive. It's going to be so bad, that it hasn't been that bad. Even though we're going through all this stuff, this is the worst. And when he says since the beginning of God's creation until now, nor ever will be. Well, so that makes me think this might be the last that he's thinking about, the end of times, when he says that particular passage. And then no one will be saved. So all of us will be out.
Well, if the Lord had not intervened, nobody would be saved.
Right, yeah.
Right. So
Yes, the Lord has not intervened. Yes, thank you.
That's what the reference of, if the Lord had not shortened those days. That's the idea that God is coming in and intervening in all this disruption in order to save the elect. Do you see that reference? Do you understand that?
Yes, I did now. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
And that's another characteristic of apocalyptic writing. So you got this great conflict between good and evil. You've got all this turmoil, all this, and God has to intervene to bring it all to an end, right?
Yes.
Man can't do it on his own. Human beings can't do it on their own. They need God to come in. And so that could very easily be a reference to the end, right? So that you have all this tribulation going on, but don't worry, because God will at some point intervene and save the elect. You got that?
And the elect will be those who are saved?
The elect are those whom God has chosen, right?
Okay.
And now, could that also have referred to what happened at the destruction of the temple? Sure. Because don't forget, if you look at it from that perspective, that this is a reference to the destruction of the temple, basically Jesus is saying, look, the Romans are going to come in, they're going to destroy everything. Everybody's going to flee. It's going to be complete and utter turmoil and confusion. But thank God that the Lord will still be part of it, and he will intervene, and Christianity, the elect, the faithful to God, and even the faithful to God, the Jews, will be saved, and they will emerge from that event. In other words, the Romans will not, they may succeed in destroying the temple, but they're not going to succeed in destroying Judaism or Christianity.
Right. And for some reason, and I need to go back and reread Revelation, that thought of the 144,000 came to mind. Aren't those part of the elect, the saved, and those who Christians?
Right. Yes, the 144,000 are referred to as the elect.
Right.
And elect simply means chosen one. Okay, like when we have an election, we're choosing somebody. That's where that word comes from. So it's kind of like a redundancy, for the sake of the elect whom he chose. Well, by definition, the elect are the ones he chose. So the elect, if it's the destruction of the temple, the elect could be the Christians and or the Jews who will survive the destruction of the temple, right? Or if it's a reference to the end of time, the elect are going to be those who survive the destruction of the world. Right? See it?
Right, exactly.
So again, if when Dee saw the destruction of the temple in this passage, she's absolutely right. It could be a reference to the destruction of the temple. When Garnetta and Esther saw a destruction of the end of the world and the end of time, they're absolutely right. It could be a reference to that. So you see how this is a very symbolic, and no one really knows for sure exactly what Jesus is referring to. Is he referring to the destruction of the temple that is yet to occur, or is he referring to the end of time?
Jesus, that's what I said at the beginning. It was confusing. Jesus is confusing. You know, he never gives you a straight answer most of the time, and he makes you have to go through all of this to figure out what he's talking about.
Yeah, and apocalyptic writing or preaching is confusing almost by definition, because it's all symbolic, right? So what is one of the most confusing books in the New Testament to read?
Revelation.
The book of Revelation is probably, most people who've read the whole New Testament will say the book of Revelation is the most confusing book of the New Testament, right? Because it's apocalyptic writing, and it's symbolic, it's conflict, it's intervention, it's all these things, but it's not really clear exactly what's going on.
And that's why so many people are scared of it. A lot of people are afraid to read it. And when they read it, they're still afraid to read it because they don't understand all the symbolism that's happening behind the book.
Right.
And like I said before, it's confusing. They don't have anybody to work with them and help break it down. But some, I have to say this, some pastors play into that fear and make you, make you afraid to, when you read that. If you listen to them preach, they're making you afraid, to just,
Absolutely. And, basically certainly the book of Revelation and even this passage, these are actually messages of hope, right? Because if the Lord had not shortened those days, no one would be saved. But for the sake of the elect whom he chose, he did shorten those days. In other words, God will intervene on your side if you're faithful and you're part of the elect. You'll survive this.
Yeah.
Okay, so
John wrote Revelation as a book of hope.
Absolutely.
You read Revelation, it's like it's telling you, well, the good guys win.
Exactly. And why is that a message? When the book of Revelation was written, why was that an important message to what was happening to the Christians when the book of Revelation was written, that the good guys win? Why was that important?
Well, they were prosecuted. They were given, they were put in the lion's den. They were in hiding. Right. All kinds of things were happening to them. When John was on this island by itself.
Right.
Exactly. Exactly. So the often apocalyptic writing is written to appeal to people whose lives are already in turmoil, right? So that's exactly what when the book of Revelation was written, just as Dee said, the Christians are being persecuted, they're being fed to the lions, they're being tortured, they're being crucified, they're being beheaded. The Romans are doing awful things to the Christians. So do you think they could identify with images and conflict and all of these things, and then at the end the good guys win?
Yep.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely, yes.
And one of the reasons I'll often say that today we have a hard time, we actually see the book of Revelation as fearful, right? Why? Because we're the comfortable ones today. We're not being persecuted, or we're the ones who are in power. So we tend to identify with the powerful in the book of Revelation. And does it go well for the powerful in the book of Revelation? No, it does not go well for those who are in power in the book of Revelation. So that's one of the cultural things, that we're no longer, the ones being persecuted. And so that's why we don't necessarily see it as a book of hope, when in fact it is, because we are supposed to be the ones who are being persecuted. But when the books were written, those who were being persecuted needed to hear that message. And then look, Jesus even says that, be watchful, I have told it to you all beforehand. What do you think he's warning them about?
All the stuff that was about to happen. I mean,
It's going to be tough out there.
yeah.
So if he's referring to the destruction of the temple, you know, he's telling you it's going to be tough. The Romans are going to come in here and they're going to do all sorts of nasty things. And you're going to think that it's the end of the world, but it's not. Don't worry. God's still on your side. You'll still survive it. Or if it's a reference to the end of time, there's going to be turmoil and persecution and everything. But fear not. The Lord will shorten those days and you will be saved. Okay.
Now, and they got that part in there. So if I'm looking, when disaster hit, just like we were going over the 9/11 recently, right? Mm-hmm. So when disaster hit, people are looking for Messiah or something, God, to help them through whatever's going. And he got that in there. If anyone say, look, here's the Messiah. Look there he is. Do not believe it. False messiahs, false prophets will arise and will perform signs and wonder in order to mislead, if that were possible, the elect. That happens. When people are fearful, they are looking for some word or somebody in authority to give them peace of mind so that they can feel better if we are going through all this stuff. And yes, false prophets do arise in those particular things, and you'll find people going to them, and he's telling us that that's not supposed to happen.
Bingo. Gosh, G, you see, you're starting to get it. That's exactly how you would interpret what Jesus is saying right there.
Right.
Now, Esther, bring in Donald Trump.
Oh no.
Oh my goodness gracious. I wouldn't even know where to begin, but that is a situation where his followers, the Trumpers, were looking at him as an idol. I mean, even at one of what was it, the Republican conference, they actually made that idol, that gold. Remember?
Yes.
It was like, at least
they literally made that, and that's exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll even go a little bit further. Not all Trump supporters, but many of the Trump supporters, after the election of Barack Obama and the rise of all of these other groups of, African Americans, of gay and lesbian, of women, of immigrants, all these groups are taking our country away from us, right? It's the end of the world.
Right.
And who is coming to save us? Donald Trump has come to save us from all of this disaster that is looming, that the end of the time is coming. And we need a Messiah to save us from the impending doom.
And he's the false Messiah. He's the false prophet.
But in their defense, and per this passage, every group is looking for a Messiah. And I'm gonna say this again, because we had, I remember when Martin Luther King died, he was like the Messiah for the Black people. And there hasn't been another Messiah since he left. And people, the Black community is still looking for that Messiah to step up and be, someone to lead. Like these people are looking at Donald Trump. But every group looks for that person that is going to make them feel better and make a change and hopefully help them make a change in their life. So I think that, I mean, I'm not supporting these people, but I'm saying that looking at this passage, all of us look for that Messiah. And God knows, even Martin Luther King knew that he wasn't the Messiah, but we have to be watchful. And, you know, sometimes some people were even trying to make Barack Obama that Messiah because he was the first African-American president. So, you know, and they were disappointed because he didn't do everything that they thought he could do.
Excellent. That's absolutely right. You know, the only reason I picked on Trump is because Esther had raised it earlier. But you're absolutely right. This is a problem. This will be a problem throughout all of history. And Jesus is no fool. He knows human nature. And he knows that when there's conflict, that people are going to start looking for messiahs. And,
Right.
who is the only Messiah?
Jesus.
Jesus is the only Messiah. So don't be misled by false messiahs and false prophets. Be watchful and know that I have told it all to you beforehand. Okay, so when we come back and look at our lives and we read this passage, we say, gee, Jesus had told us this all along. We really shouldn't be surprised, should we?
No.
No.
And there's one more thing that he said here in passage. You went over that. If the Lord had not shortened these days, no one would be saved. For the sake of the elect, whom he chose, we talked about the elect, he did shorten the days. So that passage is telling me, and I'm going through all this stuff in my own life, that no matter what we're going through, you already said that, Father, that he will intervene if we are a few of those, if we are those elected he have chosen, which means that if we have faith and believe and not be taken on by all this other crap, because we have to be watchful. And he told us beforehand that God is there. He will be in the midst of that, and you will be okay.
You'll be all right.
We will be all right. So this is I was blown away at the beginning, and it was so confusing but as we went through each session and through our conversation, and God inspired wisdom, because that's what it is, that helped us see exactly what was going on here. And this is a great time for us to gather, because to me, having this passage at Mass and we listen to it, we don't know what the heck he's talking about unless we got somebody up there to help us break this down. And as he going through his homily, they got so much time to make me understand, well, how is this going to reflect me in my life? That's what we're looking for when we hear homily on Sunday morning. I want to hear, how is this going to reflect in my everyday life, not my everyday life, but maybe in our community, that what's going on right now, that this passage would help us, to understand why we're having all these shootings in Baltimore, why these 14-year-olds are being shot, and all of this stuff that's giving us gas. It's giving us gas. Where's God in all the middle of this stuff? He is in the middle of this stuff, and we are still surviving. We are here. I mean, we just have to know and have faith that through all this stuff, God is in there. He is in there, and things are going to change. But we have to believe that God, in God's own time, it will happen. I swear I wasn't going to say nothing else.
No, and I think that's great. And so we're going to end this passage by rereading it from the beginning to an end, because I think it's, when you redo that, it's going to be just like Dee says, you put it we pulled it apart. Now we're going to put it back together again. But remember, so when most of us hear this passage, we think of the end of time. And my guess is that that's where most preaching focuses on. And that's a legitimate interpretation of it. Okay. There's nothing wrong with that interpretation of it. But, what we did today was go through the passage and see Well, it could also have been a reference to this, or it could also be so it could have been a reference to the destruction of the temple. It
Right.
could be a reference to our very day here and now, right? What's happening to us right here and now. It could have been to the death of Jesus, right? And the crucifixion of Jesus, that, the wailing and everything that occurred when they thought the Messiah had been killed, right? This could be referenced to a variety of things. And all of those interpretations are legitimate interpretations, because it's not clear what Jesus is exactly referring to, because that's the whole point of apocalyptic preaching and writing. It's supposed to be able to be interpreted in a variety of ways to bring meaning to your life as you're living it right here and now. Okay, so Esther, why don't you read the whole passage right through, and then we'll be done with this passage.
Okay. When you see the desolating abomination standing where he should not, let the reader understand, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains, and a person on a housetop must not go down or enter to get anything out of his house, and a person in a field must not return to get his cloak. Woe to pregnant women and nursing mothers in those days. Pray that this does not happen in winter. For those times will have tribulation such as has not been since the beginning of God's creation until now, nor ever will be. If the Lord had not shortened those days, no one would be saved. But for the sake of the elect whom he chose, he did shorten the days. If anyone says to you then, look, here is the Messiah. Look, there he is. Do not believe it. False messiahs and false prophets will arise and will perform signs and wonders in order to mislead, if that were possible, the elect. Be watchful. I have told it all to you beforehand.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right, so let's go on to the next section.
Awesome.
We won't spend as much time on this because it's a pretty quick one. You want to continue, Esther, or does somebody else want to read?
I'll continue if no one wants to read.
I can read.
All right, Ronnie's going to read?
Yes.
Okay.
The becoming of the Son of Man. But in those days, after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give us light, and the stars will be falling from the sky, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send out the angels and gather elect from the four winds, from the end of the earth to the end of the sky.
Okay. What's your impression? Is this good news
My
or bad
impression
news?
would be bad news. It's almost like it would almost like when Jesus died, how the earth, the sun would be darkened, there would be no light, the ground would shake, heaven and the earth would shake.
Okay, but then
almost,
don't leave out the rest of the passage.
Right. Okay, but I'm right.
So then what happens? I mean, that's great. This absolutely could be a reference to the crucifixion and death of Jesus.
But then there will be glory.
Then there will be light. It's
Right,
like it's like being it's like you're sitting in the house and the power goes off, and all of a sudden, here comes the light. Here comes the light back on, and a blaze of all of this. Jesus, the Son of Man, is coming through all of this to give and great power and glory to give us hope oh, everything's going to be all right. Here he comes. You know, I think it's good.
And what does it mean? He's going to send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the end of the earth to the end of the sky.
Although he's gonna collect all his faithful followers.
All his faithful, yeah, people that believe in him.
People who are still believe through all that, you know, when you go to a tribulation that he talked about before, and we all been there, tribulation shakes your faith. And but there are people who go through no matter what they go through, and they will not lose faith. And I think these are the people that God is going to pull up. Those people who believe no matter what, they kept the faith no matter what. And we know those people. They are people that I know. And I talked about earlier, my mother, no matter what happened to, you know, these people, they will keep the faith. Oh Lord, go ahead.
Okay.
So I guess I'm thinking that the people that don't have faith in Jesus or don't believe in him, those people will they will die. I mean, they will be destroyed. And then those who do believe in him will remain.
I mean, you would have to extrapolate that from the text, right? It doesn't actually say that.
Yeah, I was looking at that the angels would gather his elect.
Right.
From the four winds.
But does it say anything about the other people?
That's why I'm thinking
No.
they will be destroyed.
Well,
what else would happen to
that's
them?
what I mean. You're extrapolating that, and that could be what's happened. But the reality is, if you look at it, he doesn't say anything about the other people. All he's saying is that the elect, you guys can rest assured, you know, God's going to send the angels and gather you and keep you safe. So yeah, but we don't know what happens to the other people.
Yeah.
But we do know that those who are the elect, the ones who remain faithful to God, will be saved. So let's go back and say, just Garnetta, you were the one who said this could be a reference to the crucifixion, right? Because the sun was darkened. Right?
No, that wasn't me.
Oh, was that Ronnie?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, Ronnie. So absolutely, this could be a reference to the crucifixion, and it will seem like the end was coming with the death of Jesus. But nope, Jesus will come again, right? Jesus will. They were expecting that, right? And he'll regather his elect, and they will be saved. It could be a reference to the destruction of the temple. What do you think the environment was like when the Romans were destroying Jerusalem and burning it down and destroying the temple? What did it may have felt like?
It was terrifying.
The end of the world.
Yeah, the sun was being darkened, right? I mean, imagine literally all the smoke in the sky, right? The black smoke arising because of the destruction. You know, the stones are coming down from the other. I mean, it might feel like the stars were falling out of the sky, right? So that whole reference could be, again, symbolic of the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem. Or it could be a reference to the end of time, right? That all of creation will be brought to an end, and then the Son of Man will come and gather his elect. Okay. So again, you see how there's it could be referring to any of these things.
Yes.
We today tend to focus on the end of time, that this is all about the end, but not necessarily. Does anybody recognize this passage from another part of the Bible? This comes from the book of Daniel. Okay, so if you look at the book of Daniel, you'll see this passage. So actually, what Jesus is doing is quoting the book of Daniel when he's talking about this part. And remember, the book of Daniel, remember I said that was apocalyptic writing, and it was written at the time that the Greeks were oppressing the Jews. And so again, you know, these are references to the past as well, that that certainly the Jews of Jesus' time would have picked up on. So just like they would have picked up on the abominating desolation as being Antiochus in the temple, they would have also seen this as a reference to the book of Daniel and the persecution of the Jews by the Greeks. All right.
Yes.
All right. Well, we didn't finish the chapter, but we only have a few more, unless people want to go real quick and finish it up, so then we can start with the Passion. You want to just finish it up real quick? It's gonna be it's pretty much more of the same. Let's finish it up real quick, because it's really just more of the same. So Ronnie, why don't you keep reading verse 28?
Okay. The lesson of the fig tree. Learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branch becomes tender and sprouts leaves, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see these things happening, know that he is near at the gates. Amen, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Let me keep reading.
Yep, keep going.
Okay. Need for watchfulness. But of that day or hour, no one knows, neither the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Be watchful, be alert. You do not know when the time will come. It is like a man traveling abroad. He leaves home and places his servants in charge, each with his work, and orders the gatekeeper to be on watch. Watch, therefore, you do not know when the Lord of the house is coming, whether in the evening or at midnight or at cockcrow or in the morning. May he not come suddenly and find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to all, watch.
Okay. Is this good news or bad news?
It's good news
I think it's good news.
It is. It is good news. Why is it good news?
if you're prepared.
Right, he's telling you to be prepared.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. That's
If
right.
you're prepared.
You're prepared.
So just to just bring it home real fast. So this part, learn a lesson from the fig tree. He's basically saying, just as in nature, you can tell something's going to happen, right? So that when the fig tree, its branches become tender and sprouts leaves, you know that summer is coming because it's getting ready to grow. Well, there's going to be turmoil in your life. And when there's turmoil in life, whether it's a historical, like the destruction of the temple, whether it's the end of the world, or whether it's just something going on in your own life, when those things happen, you should know that that the Son of Man is near. He's at the gates. He's ready to come to you. Okay. We don't know when any of this is going to happen. And I think that's, especially when it comes to the end of time. I mean, that's why I just get so frustrated when people try to figure out when the end of the world is coming, by lining up this and this batches that, and the book of Revelation says this, and Jesus said that. And I mean, Jesus says outright, no one will know when these things will happen, not even the Son, which means if Jesus doesn't know, what makes you think we can figure it out? Only the Father knows when heaven and earth will pass away. Okay. But in this case too, heaven and earth might not be the end of the world. It might be your heaven and earth, right? It might be your world that's passing away. And in that case, don't worry. God's word, Jesus's words will never pass away, and he will be near at the gates, right? So all you have to do is be watchful, because you do not know when the time will come. And that, right? Life can turn on a dime, right?
Yeah.
And
Today, something may
yes.
happen to somebody here and their entire life is turned upside down.
That's so true.
Doesn't it? And it can happen without notice, right? Without warning. So be watchful, be alert, always be prepared, because you don't know when the master will return home, and don't let him come home and find you sleeping. Watch. All right. Amen.
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 So that's the end of chapter 13. Probably, as I said, the most difficult chapter of the Gospel of Mark to figure out. Now you got it all figured out. You can go out and preach it to anybody.
Mhm.
I'm not gonna say that.
I wish, right?
I'm better, but
Well, you'll have to wait and see what I do with it when it comes up, because I don't, again, preaching obviously is all a function of what's happening in the world at the time, what's happening in people's lives, and then
Yeah.
trying to, as Dee says,
Right.
trying to find a connection between what the word is saying and what its meaning for us in this time and place is. So, sometimes it's legitimate to preach about the end of the world because that's what people need to hear about. Sometimes it's legitimate to talk about the crisis on a national level or on a citywide level, because that's what's going on in people's lives. And sometimes it's perfectly appropriate to talk about personal crises, illnesses and family disputes, breakups and all that kind of stuff, because that's what's going on in people's lives. But you see how these passages could refer really to any of those things.
Yes.
And that's the beauty of it. Apocalyptic writing is really kind of cool when you get used to it, because what it's saying is there's going to be turmoil all the time, but just hang on, just be faithful, because in the end, the Son of Man will come and will vindicate you. So whether it's a personal crisis, whether it's a citywide crisis, whether it's a national crisis, or whether it's the end of the world, do not fear. Just be watchful, be faithful, and hold on to the end. Amen.
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 All right. Well, then that's all we have to do today.